Chapter 81. Telamon and Peleus, or Pelus. The mother of Acasus' two elder sons, namely Telamon and Pelus, was Endis, Sciron's daughter. Phocus, the youngest, was a son of the Nereid Sabmath, who had turned herself into a seal while unsuccessfully trying to escape from Acasus' embraces. They all lived together in the island of Aegina. B. Phocus was Acasus' favorite, and his excellence at athletic games drove Telamon and Pelus wild with jealousy. For the sake of peace, therefore, he led a party of Aegian emigrants to Phocus, where another Phocus, a son of Ornithian the Corinthian, had already colonized the neighborhood of Tithoria. Oh, how do you say that? Tithoria and Delphi. And in the course of time, his sons extended the state of Phocus to its present limits. One day, Achaeus sent for Phocus, perhaps intending to bequeath him the island kingdom, but encouraged by the mother, Telamon, and Pelus plotted to kill him. But encouraged by their mother, Telamon and Pelus plotted to kill him on his return. They challenged Phocus to a five-fold athletic contest, and whether it was Telamon who felled him, as if accidentally, by throwing a stone discus at his head, and Pelus, who then dispatched him with an axe, or whether it was the other way about, has been much disputed ever since. In either case, Telamon and Pelus were equally guilty of fratricide, and together hid the body in a wood where Achaeus found it. Phocus lies buried close to the Achaeum. C. Telamon took refuge in the island of Salamis, where Sycrius was king, and sent back a messenger denying any part of the murder. Achaeus, in reply, forbade him ever again to set foot in Aegina, though permitting him to plead his case from the sea. Rather than stand and shout on the rock deck of his ship anchored behind the breakers, Telamon sailed one night into what is now called the Secret Harbor and sent masons ashore to build a mole, which would serve him as rostrum. They finished this task before dawn, and it is still to be seen. Achaeus, however, rejected his eloquent plea that Phocus's death was accidental, and Telamon returned to Salamis, where he married the king's daughter, Glos, and succeeded to Sycrius' throne. D. This Sycrius, the son of Poseidon and Salamis, daughter of the river Asopus, had been chosen king of Salamis when he killed a serpent to end its widespread ravages. But he kept a young serpent of the same breed, which behaved in the same destructive way until expelled by I can't say this word. Eurylochus, a companion of Odysseus. Demeter then welcomed it and Elysius as one of her attendants. But some explained that I can't say these words today. Syracus, himself called Serpent because of his cruelty, was banished by Eurylochus and took refuge at Elysius, where he was appointed to a minor office in Demeter's sanctuary. He became, at all events, one of the guardian heroes of Salamis, the Serpent Isle. There he was buried, his face turned to the west, and appeared in serpent form among the Greek ships at the famous victory of Salamis. Sacrifices were offered at his tomb, and when the Athenians disputed the possession of the island with the Megarians, Solon, the famous lawgiver, sailed across by night and propitiated him. E. On the death of his wife Glos, Telamon married Paraboa of Athens, a granddaughter of Pelops, who bore him great Ajax, and later the captive Hesione, daughter of Laomedion, who bore him the equally well-known Teucer. F. Phelus fled to the court of Actor, king of Phthia, by whose adopted son Euryton was purified. Actor then gave him his daughter Polymela in marriage and a third part of the kingdom. One day Euryton, who ruled over another third part, took Pelles to hunt the Caledonian boar, but Pelles speared him accidentally and fled to Iolcus, where he was once more purified, this time by Acastus, son of Peleus. Yeah. G. Acastus's wife, Chrytheis, tried to seduce Pelles, and when he rebuffed her advances, lyingly told Polymela, he intends to desert you and marry my daughter Sterop. Polymela believed Chrytheisius's mischievous tale and hanged herself. Not content with the harm she had done, Chrytheis went weeping to Acastus and accused Pelles of having attempted her virtue. H. Loth to kill the man whom he had purified, Acastus challenged him to a hunting contest on Mount Pelion. Now, in reward for this chastity, the gods had given Peleus a magic sword forged by Dalius, who had the property of making his owner victorious in battle and equally successful in the chase. Thus he soon piled up a great heap of stags, bears, and boars, but when he went off to kill even more, Acastus's companions claimed the prey as their masters and jeered at his want of skill. Let the dead beasts decide this matter with their own mouths, cried Pelles, who had cut out their tongues and now produced them from a bag to prove that he had easily won the contest. I. After a festive supper, in the course of which he outdid all others as a trencherman, Pelles fell fast asleep. Acastus then robbed him of his magic sword, hid it under a pile of cow dung, and stole away with his followers. Pelles awoke to find himself deserted, disarmed, and surrounded by wild centaurs who were on the point of murdering him. However, the king of Charon not only intervened to save his life, but divined where the sword lay hidden and restored it to him. J. Meanwhile, on the advice of Themis, Zeus chose Pelles to be the husband of the Nereid Thetis, whom he would have married himself had he not been discouraged by the fates' prophecy that any son born to Thetis would become far more powerful than his father. He was also vexed that Thetis had rejected his advances for her foster mother Hera's sake, and therefore vowed that she should never marry an immortal. Hera, however, gratefully decided to match her with the noblest of mortals and summoned all Olympians to the wedding when the moon should next be full, at the same time sending her messenger Iris to King Charon's cave with an order for Pelles to make ready. Hold on. Oh, excuse me. K. Now, Charon foresaw that Thetis, being immortal, would have first resent the marriage, and acting on his instructions, Pelles concealed himself behind a bush of party-colored myrtle berries on the shores of the Thessalian islet, where Thetis often came, riding naked on a harnessed dolphin, to enjoy her midday sleep in the cave, which this bush half screened. No sooner had she entered the cave and fallen asleep than Pelles seized hold of her. The struggle was silent and fierce. Thetis turned successfully into fire, water, a lion, and a serpent, but Pelles had been warned what to expect and clung to her resolutely, even when she became an enormous slippery cuttlefish and squirted ink at him, a change which accounts for the name of Cape Cepus, the nearby promontory now sacred to the Nereids. Though burned, drenched, mauled, stung, and covered with sticky sepia ink, Pelles would not let go, and in the end she yielded, and they lay locked in a passionate embrace. L. Their wedding was celebrated outside Charon's cave on Mount Pelion. The Olympians attended, seated on 12 thrones. Hera herself raised the bridal torch, and Zeus, now reconciled to his defeat, gave Thetis away. The Fates and the Muses sang, Ganymedes poured nectar, and the 50 Nereids performed a spiral dance on the white sands. Crowds of centaurs attended the ceremony, wearing chaplets of grass, brandishing darts of fur, and prophesying good fortune. M. Chiron gave Pelles a spear. Athene had polished its shaft, which was cut from an ash on the summit of Pelion, and Hephaestus had forged its blade. The gods' joint gift was a magnificent suit of golden armor, to which Poseidon added the two immortal horses, Balus and Xanthus, by the west wind out of the harpy Podarge. Podarge? I don't know. N. But the goddess Eris, who had not been invited, was determined to put the divine guests at loggerheads, and while Hera, Athene, and Aphrodite were chatting ambiblically, chatting together, arm in arm, she rolled a golden apple at their feet. Pallas picked it up and stood embarrassed at its inscription, "To the fairest," not knowing which of the three might be intended. This apple was the proto-cataractical cause of the Trojan War. Oh, some describe Peleus' wife Thetis as Chiron's daughter and a mere mortal, and say that Chiron, wishing to honor Peleus, spread the rumor that he had married the goddess, her mistress. P. Meanwhile, Peleus, whose fortunes the kindly Charon had restored, and who now also acquired large herds of cattle as a dowry, sent some of these to Phthia as an indemnity for his accidental killing of Eurytion. But when the payment was refused by the Phthians, left them to roam at will about the countryside. This proved to have been a fortunate decision, because a fierce wolf, which Samath had sent after them to avenge the death of her son Phocus, so glutted its hunger on the masterless cattle that it could hardly crawl. When Peleus and Thetis came face to face with the wolf, it made as if to spring at Peleus' throat, but Thetis glowered balefully with protruded tongue and turned it into a stone, which is still pointed out on the road between Locris and Phocus. Q. Later, Peleus returned to Iolcus, where Zeus supplied him with an army of ants transformed into warriors, and thus he became known as king of the Myrmidons. He captured the city single-handed, killed first Acastus, then the cowering Cretheus, and led his Myrmidons into the city between the pieces of her dismembered body. R. Thetis successfully burned away the mortal parts of her 6 sons by Peleus in order to make them immortal like herself, and sent each of them in turn up to Olympus. But Peleus contrived to snatch the 7th from her when she had already made all his body. But Peleus contrived to snatch the 7th from her when she had already made all his body, except the ankle bone, immortal by laying it on the fire and afterwards rubbing it with ambrosia. The half-charred ankle bone had escaped this final treatment. Enraged by his interference, Thetis said farewell to Peleus and returned to her home in the sea, naming her son Achilles, because he had as yet placed no lips to her breast. Peleus provided Achilles with a new ankle bone taken from the skeleton of the swift giant Demius, but this was fated to prove his undoing. S. Too old to fight at Troy himself, Peleus later gave Achilles the golden armor, the ashen spear, and the 2 horses which had been his wedding presents. He was eventually expelled from Phthia by Acastus' son, who no longer feared him when they heard of Achilles' death. But Thetis instructed him to visit the cave by the myrtle bush where he had first mastered her, and wait there until she took him away to live with her forever in the depths of the sea. Peleus went to the cave and eagerly watched the passing ships, hoping that one of them might be bringing his grandson Neoptolemus back from Troy. T. Neoptolemus, meanwhile, was refitting his shattered fleet in Molossa, and when he heard of Peleus' banishment, disguised himself as a Trojan captive and took ship for Iolcus, there contriving to kill Acastus' son and seize the city. But Pelles, growing impatient, had chartered a vessel for a voyage to Molossa. Rough weather drove her to the island of Icos near Euboea, where he died and was buried, thus forfeiting the immortality which Thetis had promised him.